I didn't ask for much when I applied for the job. Just somewhere quiet, somewhere far from people, somewhere I could be alone for a while. So when the listing said Night Watch Assistant Remote Historical, Lighthouse Facility, $3,200 month, minimal supervision, I didn't even hesitate. No one really hires people like me, college dropout, no references, nothing to brag about. But this place didn't care. The application was a single page. No interview, just a call from a man named Rudd saying, "You're hired. Bring warm clothes and a flashlight. No ocean," he added. "It's landlocked. Old geological fluke." I thought he was joking, but when the shuttle dropped me off on that isolated ridge, far from any town, I saw it for myself. A lighthouse stall, rusted, looming like a tooth from the rocky hillside. No sea, no waves, just pines and granite cliffs surrounding it, like prison walls. I almost asked the driver to turn back, but he was already speeding off. Dust swallowed the road behind him. It was dead silent, and in that silence, I realized something odd. The lighthouse still smelled like salt water, like rotting kelp and driftwood, the kind of scent that clings to harbors and fishermen's coats. But there wasn't a single drop of water anywhere in sight, not even a pond, just miles of forest, and that single, impossibly out-of-place tower. The door creaked open before I even touched it. A man stood there, grizzled, broad-shouldered, with a cigarette dangling from the side of his mouth like it had been lit years ago. "You're late," he muttered. It was Rudd. I stepped inside, backpack still slung over my shoulder. The interior was strange spiral staircase, curving up and down, old nautical paintings on the walls, and a faint low hum coming from beneath the floorboards. The place felt too heavy, somehow, like the air didn't move right. Rudd didn't seem like the chatty type. He handed me a ring of brass keys, pointed toward a cot tucked under the staircase, and said, "You'll take second shift, midnight to 8. I cover the day. Don't touch the beacon controls." "Got it," I said. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. That night, I stood in the glass chamber at the top of the lighthouse, staring out into complete blackness. No ships, no cities, just the endless silhouettes of trees, waves of pine as far as I could see, and the beacon still turned. Why a lighthouse existed here, why it still needed to operate, was never explained to me. It simply was. The job was real. The tower was real. The light was real. And below the metal grate floor of the top chamber, I could feel a faint vibration, like something was pushing upward, tapping. From somewhere deep beneath the tower, I ignored it. For the first few nights, everything was mostly fine. I read a book, did some pacing, watched the horizon. I even told myself the job might not be so bad, until I heard it for the first time. A knock out from beneath the lighthouse. 3 knocks, slow, hollow. I froze, and that was when I realized this wasn't just a strange building in a strange place. This tower had secrets, and something inside it wanted to come up. On my 3rd day, Rudd finally gave me the rules. He didn't hand them to me on paper. He just recited them while stirring a pot of something gray and steaming on the tiny stovetop. No fanfare, no warnings, just facts. "You'll follow these," he said without looking at me. "No exceptions. I don't care if you hear screams or see something in the stairwell. Follow them." That last part caught me off guard. Screams. He wiped his hands on a towel, lit a new cigarette from the stub of the last one, and began pacing. His boots echoed hard against the iron floor. "Rule 1, he said. "Do not answer the knock if it comes between 2:33 and 2:37 a.m. Before or after that, it might be me. But never during those 4 minutes." I blinked. "You knock." "Sometimes," he muttered, "but not then." He took a sip from a chipped mug. "Rule 2. The light upstairs must stay on and rotating from dusk till dawn. If it stops, even for a minute, get it spinning again, fast. Don't ask why. I scribbled this into a notebook I'd started carrying. It felt absurd, but his face said it wasn't a joke. Rule 3. Don't go down to the sub-basement. The hatch is locked for a reason. You'll hear sounds down there. Ignore them. I didn't even know there was a sub-basement. I'd seen stairs leading up, of course, but nothing going down. Rule 4, he continued, rubbing his temples. If you look out the window and see the trees moving but there's no wind, don't look too long. Just shut your eyes. Count to 20. They'll stop the trees. He said it like it was normal. I started sweating despite the cold. The heater in the lighthouse barely worked, and yet a slick of dread crept down my spine as his tone got flatter. Rule 5. You'll sometimes see a second lighthouse light in the far distance out near the hills. Doesn't make sense, I know. But don't flash back. Let it blink. Never acknowledge it. Is there another station nearby? I asked. He shook his head slowly. There shouldn't be. He took another drag of his cigarette and then added, almost as an afterthought, Rule 6. If you wake up with seawater on your floor, don't clean it. Just open all the windows and leave the door wide until it evaporates. Doesn't matter how cold it is. If you try to mop it, it'll come back worse. I stopped writing. That's happened before. He didn't answer, just leaned over the pot on the stove and gave it another stir. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the bubbling of whatever he was cooking and the distant groan of the lighthouse turning. I was starting to feel like I'd accepted a job in a place that didn't want to be understood, like the building itself was keeping secrets from me. But I'd already signed the contract, already accepted the key. You're doing nights, he repeated, finally setting 2 bowls on the small table. That means you'll be alone when it's at its worst. And trust me, some nights are worse than others. I sat slowly. The stew tasted like canned meat and salt. Too much salt. There's no ocean, I said out loud. Why does this place smell like brine? Why is there a lighthouse at all? He stared at me long and hard, then said, there was an ocean here, long ago. Some say it never really left. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't ask again. That night, I climbed the spiral staircase alone. The light rotated smoothly overhead, casting long slices of pale white across the trees. It almost looked beautiful if not for the fact that there was nothing to warn. No ships, no rocks, no waves, just forest. Still, I checked the motor, double-checked the fuel, just like Rudd said. And then, I waited. Around 2 a.m., I started hearing things. Footsteps on the stairwell, 2 floors down, but I was the only one awake. Rudd's shift ended at midnight, and he always went straight to bed. I stood completely still, watching the trapdoor leading to the staircase, heart pounding, then 3 knocks. Not at the door below, but from underneath the top floor, from beneath the metal grate I was standing on. I looked at my watch. 2:34 a.m. I didn't move. The knocking came again, slower, louder. It didn't sound like fists. It sounded like something wet, like heavy, soaked hands slapping the metal. I shut my eyes and whispered the rule. Do not answer the knock between 2:33 and 2:37. I waited. Eventually, the knocks stopped, but the floor stayed wet beneath my boots for the rest of the night. On my 5th night, I made a mistake. It wasn't intentional. I wasn't trying to be brave. If anything, I was tired, a little too comfortable. The routine had begun to dull the fear until I forgot just how serious those rules were. It started with the beacon light, around 3:10 am. I was reading at the console when I noticed the room went dim. Not completely dark, just off, like something had changed in the rhythm of the pulses. I looked up and saw the beam had stopped rotating. The gears were humming, like always, but the light just sat still, fixed in one direction, shining uselessly into the forest. Rule 2 flashed in my head. If it stops, even for a minute, get it spinning again, fast. I jumped to the crank and tried. The manual override. Nothing. The switch clicked, but didn't engage. A light on the panel flickered red. I opened the maintenance hatch beside the lens and crawled inside, something Rudd had told me not to do, unless it was an emergency. I figured this counted. That was my first mistake. Inside, it was claustrophobic, hot. The lens housing was much tighter than it looked, and as I adjusted the gear alignment manually, I could feel the tower shudder slightly beneath me. A deep groan, like metal under pressure. Finally, I got the motor unstuck. The light sputtered, then resumed its smooth, sweeping motion. I exhaled in relief, but when I crawled back out, everything was wrong. The room was flooded with that same salty smell, only stronger, almost like rot. The glass panes of the chamber were fogged on the outside, as though warm air was pressing up against something cold. But it was below freezing outside. That shouldn't happen. I wiped one of the panes clear, and that's when I saw it. A shape standing on the ground far below, perfectly still. It was impossible to make out through the fog and distortion, but it looked human. Tall, too tall, thin and bent, like a figure that had been stretched from both ends. It didn't move, didn't wave, just stood at the base of the lighthouse, facing straight up, right at me. I stared back, heartbeat thudding in my ears. The figure didn't vanish, didn't blink out like some trick of the eyes. It was there, and then, something worse. The stairs began to creak. Not loudly, just enough to hear between each heartbeat. One step, pause, another step, coming up slow, deliberate. I turned to the trap door, my mouth suddenly dry. Rudd was asleep. I knew that. He had to be asleep. So who or what was climbing the stairs? I reached for the metal latch and slid it shut. Locked it. Then I backed away toward the center of the room. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the hatch, waiting for it to rattle or burst open, but nothing happened. Eventually, the creaking stopped. No knock, no sound, just silence. When I finally looked out the window again, the figure on the ground was gone, but the fog remained. I told Rudd about it the next morning. He just looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You crawled inside the beacon, didn't you?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just for a minute." He swore under his breath and grabbed a bottle from the cabinet. "You broke a rule," he said. "You touched the light. That's what it wanted. It knows you now." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he was already walking away. That night, I slept with a flashlight under my pillow, and I left my boots by the cot, like always, in the morning. They were full of seawater the next night. The trees moved. It started a little after 1 a.m. I was pacing the walkway that circles the beacon room, looking out through the frosted panes, when something caught my eye. The trees were swaying, gently at first, but there was no wind. The air was dead still. Not even the usual breeze that whispered through the upper decks. Just silence and that unnatural motion. At first, I thought it was in my head. Maybe a visual illusion, the kind your brain invents when you stare too long at the same shape. But no, the trees were reaching. The branches weren't just moving, they were twisting upward, stretching, almost unnaturally, toward the tower like seaweed in reverse. Every one of them bending as if pulled by invisible strings. I backed away from the window and remembered Rudd's 4th rule. If you see the trees move without wind, shut your eyes. Count to 20. Don't look. I'd written it down. I knew it, but I didn't follow it. Not at first. I watched, stared, even, trying to rationalize it. I leaned forward, squinting into the night. The branches, those black claws, moved in slow, synchronized waves, and between them there were gaps. Something tall moved between the trees, walking upright, smooth, fluid, like a man in a diving suit, but too big. Its shoulders were wrong, too angular, and wherever it stepped, the earth sank around it like wet sand. I stared too long. By the time I realized my mistake, it was already turning toward the lighthouse. That's when I shut my eyes. Hard. I counted. Fast at first, then slower when I realized I needed to do it right. 1, 2, 3. My hands were shaking. I clutched the railing and forced myself not to peek. 12, 13, 14. The metal around me vibrated, soft but insistent, like something massive was pressing against the base of the tower. A pressure in my ears like I'd suddenly gone deep underwater. 1920. When I opened my eyes again, the trees were still, perfectly still. The shape was gone. I didn't look down to check if it was near the base. I just backed into the center of the chamber, sat with my back to the beacon pedestal, and kept the flashlight on my lap, aimed at the floor. That same floor, cold and damp now, as if dew had formed on the inside of the building. The light continued its slow spin, but I didn't feel safe anymore. Whatever lived in those woods, it had seen me in the morning. Rudd didn't say anything, just passed me a cup of black coffee and nodded once. "You looked," he said quietly. I nodded. I tried not to. He took a deep breath, sat down, and stared out the narrow porthole window. "I did too, once," he said. 20 years ago. That caught my attention. He never talked about how long he'd been here. "You weren't the first," he added. "Most don't last a week." One guy jumped from the top. Another locked himself in the freezer till he froze to death. That was before the rules. He didn't say anything else for a while. Just stared out into the forest like he was waiting for something to return. Then he said something that stuck with me. "They remember you after that. Once you see them move," they asked. He didn't answer, just took another sip and said, "The light buys us time, but it doesn't save us." That night, the knocking came again, this time from inside the staircase wall. After that night, I couldn't sleep, not even during the day. I'd lie on the cot, exhausted, but every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear the sounds again, the knocks in the walls, the trees shifting in perfect rhythm, the squelch of footsteps on the stairs where no one walked. By the 7th day, I started searching for answers. If Rudd had lasted 20 years, surely he knew more. Then he let on. He always spoke in riddles, in fragments, like a man trying not to remember too much. But I couldn't afford to stay in the dark anymore. Not after what I'd seen. So, I waited until he left for a supply run. He only did that once a week, and even then, only down to the base shed. Barely out of sight, but just far enough that when I picked the lock to the sub-basement, the hatch was cold to the touch. I had to pry it open with a crowbar from the tool rack. As I lifted it, the smell hit me, first salt and rust and something older. Something like wet rope left to rot. A metal ladder descended into blackness. The air below was thick, humid, clinging to my lungs like steam. I clicked on my flashlight and climbed down. The sub-basement wasn't on any blueprint I'd seen. It was far larger than the lighthouse should have allowed. The stone walls were slick with condensation, and the floor was uneven, as though made of carved rock, not construction concrete. Almost like a natural cave. And at the far end a room. It had a door made of warped iron. No lock. Just a handle and a plaque above it that read, "Chamber of the Drowned." My breath caught. Inside, I found what looked like an old archive. Water-stained cabinets, rusting shelves, journals sealed in wax, stacks of nautical maps, yellowed with time. All of it untouched for decades. And on the far wall, carved directly into the stone, was a mural, a mosaic, to be exact, made of shattered tiles, fish bones, broken glass, and bits of coral. It depicted a sea, an ancient sea, with towering waves. But instead of ships, the waves were swallowing lighthouses, dozens of them. Some had faces carved into their stones, screaming, crying, their windows like eyes. And below the sea, something else. Hundreds of humanoid shapes with bloated limbs and elongated jaws, arms outstretched, climbing upward, reaching. In the center, a great black eye, watching everything. I backed away. On a nearby table, I found a set of journals, damp, falling apart, but legible. The writing was in the same style as the one rulebook I'd seen upstairs, but older, more frantic. The first entry read, 1894. The light has failed. Jacob answered the knock. It took his voice. He speaks in bubbles now. Another, 1907. We brought in a priest. He burned on the stairs. Said it wasn't hell. Said it was older. And another, later. 1945. The war ended, but it never touched this place. They kept the tower running even when the seas dried. We must. The light holds them down. The most recent entry chilled me to the bone. 1999. I took over from Malcolm. I know now what he meant. The beacon isn't a warning for ships. It's a signal to what lies beneath. If it stops, they remember. If it stops, they return. It was signed, R.W. Rudd. My knees buckled. Rudd knew. Of course he did. He wasn't just some grizzled old caretaker. He was the last in a long chain of watchers. This place had always been a prison, not for people, not even for spirits, but for something older, something that once ruled an ocean, that no longer exists. And the lighthouse, it wasn't here to save anyone, it was here to contain them. I'd heard a sound behind me, water dripping, but when I turned, I saw a trail of wet footprints leading into the room. They weren't mine. I turned and ran, flashlight shaking in my hand, the sound of splashing echoing behind me like footsteps just out of reach. I climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time and slammed the hatch shut behind me, heart pounding so loud I almost didn't hear the knock dot from underneath the hatch. 3 times. Then silence. When Rudd returned that evening, I confronted him. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just asked, "What's down there, Rudd?" He didn't flinch, just poured himself a shot of something dark and sat down without speaking. After a long silence, he finally said, "This lighthouse is the last. The others are all gone, crushed, sunken, buried. But the things underneath never stopped climbing." He tapped the table with one thick finger. "They're not ghosts, they're not spirits. They're remnants, leftovers from when the sea was young, when things crawled out of the deep and learned to walk." "Why me?" I asked. "Why hire someone who doesn't know?" "Because they notice people like you, the ones with cracks, trauma, holes in your past. You're like a signal flare to them." I didn't respond. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret in his eyes. "You should leave. Tomorrow. Why not now?" He downed the drink and said, "Because tonight is the anniversary." I didn't ask of what. That night, I heard the beacon sputter, and the knocking started before. 2:33. The knocking started at 2:12 a.m. Too early. I sat frozen beneath the rotating beacon, watching the room around me pulse with each sweep of the light. Outside, the forest was dead still, but I knew better now. I knew that stillness meant watching, waiting. The knock came again, this time louder. From the base of the staircase, I checked my watch. 2:13. Not the danger window. Not yet, but something felt wrong. The knocks didn't echo the same way. They weren't coming from wood or iron or even stone. They sounded wet, like something striking the inside of a metal drum filled with seawater. I backed toward the inner wall, grabbing the emergency axe Rudd kept near the supply hatch. Then I heard it, a voice low, bubbled, like someone speaking underwater through a busted diving mask. "Let USSs see the light." I dropped the axe. It rolled across the metal floor and stopped beside the maintenance hatch I'd used a few nights ago. The knock came again, this time from inside the wall. A metallic groan sounded from the trapdoor. I locked it, heart thudding, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The thing, whatever it was, wasn't using stairs. It was inside the structure, moving through the spaces no one should be able to move through. I pulled the blackout shutter over the glass, just like Rudd had shown me. It didn't help. Not really. The darkness behind those panes now felt alive, like it was breathing. That's when the beacon sputtered. It hiccuped once, then again, then stopped rotating altogether. Dead. The light died in a flicker, leaving the room in utter silence. The moment it stopped, I felt the shift. Something let go beneath the tower. A weight lifted not from my chest, but from the air itself. A pressure I hadn't even realized was there suddenly vanished, and the lighthouse began to vibrate. Not like a quake, like something was rising. A terrible, rhythmic groan echoed from deep below, like a chain being pulled through ancient machinery. The walls seemed to sweat. My skin crawled with goosebumps. I reached for the manual crank, tried to turn it. It jammed. The beacon refused to rotate. Something had seized it from below. I pounded on the motor housing, slammed the override, anything but. It stayed dead, and then the hatch blew open. A torrent of seawater erupted from the stairs, crashing upward like a geyser. It slammed against the ceiling, shattering one of the glass panels in the beacon room. The wind howled in cold and wet and impossible because we were miles from the sea, and still the water rose. Shapes moved in it, arms, too many of them, pale, translucent, dragging along the steel as if trying to pull the tower back under the waves it no longer had. One of them grabbed my ankle, cold, slimy, fingers with webbing between them, and joints that bent the wrong way. I kicked, slipped, scrambled, back. The thing pulled harder. Then another hand joined it, and a face surfaced white, featureless, with hollow eyes and a jaw that split open sideways. Spilling black ink, I screamed. I don't remember doing it, but I know I did. The axe was gone. The light was gone. All I had was the flashlight tanned. Even that was flickering. I aimed it at the thing's eyes, and for a second, it recoiled. Not in pain, in recognition, like it knew the light, like it remembered what it meant. It let go. The water didn't fall. It just hung there, hovering in the stairwell like a reversed waterfall. Inside it, the figures writhed and circled like sharks watching waiting. I took the opportunity. I threw the emergency battery pack into the beacon housing, slammed the fuse switch, and cranked the override again. Sparks flew, but the light turned slow at first. Jerky, but it moved, and when it did, the water sank. Not fast, not all at once, but like a tide reversing through invisible channels. The figures screamed not loud, but low, gurgling, and then they were gone. The hatch slammed shut behind them. The beacon spun. I collapsed. When I came to, it was morning. The light still turned. The floor was dry, and the trapdoor was twisted off its hinges. Rudd was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at me for a long time, then simply said, "They tested you." I couldn't speak, just nodded. He handed me a cup of hot coffee, then added, "They'll test you again." I asked him what they wanted, what they were. He stared into the tree line and whispered, "They're the reason lighthouses were built in the first place. Long before ships, long before maps. Back when the world still had edges. And if the light goes out?" He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Then the edge comes back." The next day, Rudd disappeared. I woke up around noon, shivering from a dream I couldn't fully remember, just cold water and too many hands. When I stepped into the kitchen, his cot was empty. The sheets were folded. His mug sat clean and dry beside the stove. That alone was strange. Rudd never cleaned. At first I thought maybe he'd gone to the supply shed again, but hours passed. Sunset came. The forest darkened, and still no sign of him. By 10 p.m., I started to worry. By 11, I started searching. I checked every room, every landing, the generator shack, the outhouse, even the narrow trail down the ridge that led nowhere. Nothing. I stood outside the tower, flashlight sweeping through the trees, the wind biting my neck, and that's when I saw it. Boot prints. One set, big Rudd's boots, heading out past the edge of the woods. into the dark, where no path existed. I followed them a few yards. Then they stopped, not because he turned, they just ended, as if he'd been lifted, plucked off the earth mid-step. I backed away slowly, skin crawling. When I returned to the lighthouse, something was off. The walls breathed. I don't know how else to describe it. The metal itself pulsed faintly under my hand, warm, damp, and on Rudd's cot. I found something tucked under the pillow, a note written in his sharp, scratched handwriting. You were never meant to last this long. I'm sorry. I broke a rule years ago. I made a deal. Keep the lights spinning. Give them someone new. Every year-end, they let me stay. They let me live. But this time they changed the rules. My knees buckled. He had offered me that first phone call, that easy hiring. He didn't pick me at random. He chose me. Found someone broken, isolated, with no one to miss them. And the worst part, he didn't seem sorry. Not really. Just tired. Beneath the note, taped to the mattress, was an old key, brass, thicker than the others, engraved with strange marks like barnacles or tiny tentacles. It belonged to a box I'd never seen before. I didn't want to know what it opened, but of course I had to find it. I'd scoured the storage cabinets on the second floor until I found it, a long iron chest, sealed with 3 latches, heavy enough to need both arms to move. I unlocked it. Inside were photographs, old ones, black and white, some curling at the edges, others soaked with seawater stains. Each photo showed someone sitting in the beacon room, different faces, different decades, all of them staring just slightly off camera, eyes wide, skin pale, like they knew something was watching them the moment the shutter clicked. And beneath the photos, bones, small ones, fingers, I think. Some were webbed. At the bottom of the chest was one final photo of me, from the night I arrived, taken through the beacon glass. I never posed for it. I never knew it existed. But there I was, frozen mid-step, eyes turned toward the lens, mouth half open, like I'd just said something. Someone or something had taken it before I even knew what this place truly was. And now, Rudd was gone. Not dead, not taken. Gone willingly, because it was my turn now. I didn't sleep that night. COULDN, single quotes, TII. Sat in the beacon room, axe in one hand, flashlight in the other, and stared out into the black. The light spun above me like a heartbeat, steady, slow, the only thing keeping them at bay. But I knew what came next. It was my 8th night, the same length every one of the others had lasted, the same length Rudd had needed to prepare them, sacrifice them at 1:47 a.m. The beacon stuttered again. This time, I didn't panic. I grabbed the override before the spin stopped fully, jammed the switch, fed the backup battery in by muscle memory. The beam resumed, barely a blink, but the knocks still came. 2:01 a.m. From below, no dash inside. The walls groaned. Water leaked from the ceiling, soaking the floor around the beacon motor. It steamed in the cold. I backed toward the trapdoor again, but I knew that wouldn't matter. They weren't coming from the stairs. They were already in the lighthouse. I'd made my decision. No more hiding. No more waiting to be tested, or watched, or chosen. I grabbed the key Rudd had left and climbed down past the main floor, past the basement, back into the chamber I never should have entered. The chamber of the drowned. The door opened without resistance this time. Inside, the mural had changed. The lighthouses were gone, replaced by one figure, just one standing, at the top of a spiraling staircase. Arms raised high, beacon above its head, and below the drowned. Things, reaching, worshipping, or maybe mocking. On the floor was the box, not the chest I'd opened earlier, another box, small, square, stone. The key fit. It clicked open. Inside was a bell, old, cracked, and a note. If the light fails, ring it once. If they reach the stairs, ring it twice. If you want to make a bargain, ring it 3 times. I didn't know what that meant, but I took it with me. Climbed back up into the storm, because now there was a storm outside. Wind howled like a freight train, shaking the tower, but the sky was clear. The storm wasn't weather, it was them. The trees bent inward like teeth. The earth pulsed. Water leaked from places that had never been wet before. The knocking turned to pounding. The trapdoor dented inward. I could see shapes swirling beyond the glass. Dozens, hundreds, crawling through the trees, spiraling toward the tower like moths. To flamed out, the beacon faltered again. This time, I couldn't fix it. The motor let out a sharp, mechanical snap. The rotation died, and the light, so faint, already began to dim. I held the bell. It felt warm in my hands, and I made my choice. I rang it once. The pounding stopped. The air pulled tight like the second before a scream. Twice, the lights flickered. Back to life. The beacon spun, but in reverse, and the shadows outside paused, then turned. The pounding reversed. The sea in the walls began to recede, and just as I raised the bell to ring it a 3rd time, I stopped. I don't know why. Some part of me still feared what a deal would mean. I didn't want to become Rudd. Didn't want to be part of the cycle. I dropped the bell over the railing into the shadows below, and the beacon spun forward. Again, the wind died. The tower went still. Morning came, and for the first time, I heard birds. No more seawater. No more knocks. Just silence. But not peaceful silence. Expectant. They were still out there, waiting, and I was still here. Not because I wanted to be, but because the lighthouse had chosen me now. That was 3 months ago. Rudd never came back. His name was scratched off the duty ledger, as if he never existed. The lighthouse logs now list only one name, mine. I still don't know how they updated themselves. I never touched them. But every morning, the new log entry waits for me, dated and stamped. Sometimes it's a line from a dream I don't remember having. Other times, it's a warning. One read, "Keep the light steady tonight. They're watching more closely." Another said simply, "Don't sleep too long. They learn your rhythms." I haven't left the lighthouse in weeks. Every time I think about walking down that hill, something in the air changes. The trees lean in, the stairs crackle underfoot. My breath fogs even in the sun. I'm not sure I can leave. The forest doesn't want me to. The beacon runs now, day and night. I don't let it stop. I've rebuilt half the crank assembly by hand, wired 3 batteries in parallel. Sleep in, short bursts with one eye open and my hand on the manual override. Because the knocking hasn't stopped. It just moved. It comes now from above, from the lantern chamber, from inside the light itself. I don't check during the danger window anymore. I don't try to look. But last night, I made the mistake of glancing up just once. In the beam of the turning light, I saw a figure inside the lens housing, curled, floating, like a man drowned in the glass, eyes open, mouth moving without sound, and it looked like me. The same torn coat, same boots, same tired face. It raised one hand to the glass and knocked 3 times. Tonight is different. The trees are moving again, but the wind is still. The distant lighthouse, the one in the hills, has started flashing again, brighter than ever, and there's no record of it anywhere. No map shows it. No signal pings from it. But I see it now every night, getting closer. One day, it will arrive here, and when it does, I think I'll be inside it, watching this lighthouse from there. Because this place doesn't let you leave. Not really. It just lets you change towers.